I always say it's not just life changing, it's life giving. I literally got my life back. I mean, I was in bed every other day at the height of this. It was horrible. I couldn't see a future. And so now it's just everything is bright and I just see the possibilities.
Perfectionism, self-criticism, focus on the needs of others, a lack of self-compassion, a lack of self-care. Those are learned behaviors and they can be unlearned.
Now I say to others, you don't have time to not have time. This is such a critical piece to it, to have this joy or to have enjoyment and to lighten up.
Welcome to The Story Behind the Symptoms, a podcast from Symptomatic.me. Your host is David Clarke, MD, a board-certified gastroenterologist who successfully diagnosed and treated over 7,000 patients with neuroplastic pain or illness. Each episode, we dive into our guests' life experiences to uncover the deeper causes of their symptoms. By listening to their story, you will gain insights that advance your own journey towards knowledge that becomes healing.
Hello, and welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Clarke, the president of the Association for Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms. And what we do on this podcast is that I talk to people about their neuroplastic symptoms, people that I haven't met before. And our guest today is Karen Ash. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Karen?
Sure. So I'm originally American, but I am living in Switzerland right now. I have had neuroplastic symptoms since probably around 7 or 8. And my main one, this was a small incident of stomach aches because of some stress in life. And then my main symptom has been migraines, though, for pretty much the whole part of my adult life from 17 to 52. So yeah, quite a journey.
That is unimaginable. Over 30 years of symptoms. And undoubtedly, you didn't get the care that you needed during that period of time, either from the American or the Swiss healthcare system. But why don't we start at the beginning, all the way back to age 7 or 8. And that's how I usually start with my patients, is to try to figure out what the symptoms were and what their progress has been over time.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a really classic case. I mean, I can see now, of course, in hindsight, where everything came from. But in second grade, I had a teacher that went off on sick leave. And so we were having substitute teachers. And something in this was just causing me a lot of anxiety, and every day to come into school and not exactly know who the teacher would be. And at the time, I also developed a wart on my finger. And my math teacher started calling me, if you can believe, Miss Wart Finger. She would call on me in class. I know. I can't even believe it to this day. So, of course, the kids picked it up. I started getting teased. And all of a sudden, I came up with stomach aches. And I was going to the nurse's office every day at lunchtime. And she would give me good care. And, my mother was taking me to the doctors. They couldn't figure out what was going on. And then with some digging, the nurse ended up understanding that this is where it was coming from. And I was being made fun of in the lunchroom. And this is why, I'm developing stomach aches and all this. So by the time I went into the next grade, we had gone and gotten the wart removed. I had new colleagues around. It was just, it sort of worked itself out. But this was one of my first.
Yeah, it's remarkable how tiny a difference other children will pick up on, especially if they are modeled in doing that by an adult. One of my patients, the major stress in his life is that he was 4'7" through most of high school. And, that was just a horrendous experience for him. He ended up 5'7" as his full adult height, but just terrible victim of bullying for several years in high school. Okay, so you came through that. Were you then okay for a while?
Yeah, I was until 17. And that's when the next one that I can remember anyway is that I had a soccer incident. I was slide tackling someone and I hit my head on the ground. And so I developed headaches and I had a concussion, which would be quite normal to have the headaches. But it developed then from there. And my mother trying to help, bringing me to doctors, bringing me to chiropractors, I think the message really got stuck in my brain that something was very wrong with me. I had this awful fall. My mother, the way she would explain it to the doctors, and she saw me crash and hit my head. I mean, it was just very dramatic. And so the message from 17 was something's very wrong. These headaches are not going away. Something happened in this accident. And then it just kind of perpetuated by this is that time of your life when you're trying to figure out where you go to university, what you're going to study. And I remember it being a really stressful time that everybody else seemed to have their lives figured out and what they wanted to do in life. And I just floundered. And this feeling of, I have to get it right. I have to, the personality traits were already there. I had to get this choice right or it would affect my entire life. It was just a really heavy time. And so I think that just perpetuated the problem. The brain felt very unsafe, obviously, and that went into college. And I had daily headaches in college. And that was picked up the year that I came back home for summer vacation. I got a small cut. And it wouldn't clot. And so my mother was on the phone with the doctor and I heard her say something like, no, she doesn't take aspirin. And I perked up and I said, yeah, I take aspirin every day. And nobody had told me that it was, not right to take so many aspirin. But the doctor, obviously asked a lot of questions and I was taking about 6 aspirin a day because I was getting daily headaches and nobody was, yeah. So then I got taken to a neurologist and got a proper diagnosis of migraine. But the issue too with this is that my father had them not very often, and my grandfather apparently had them. And so right from 18 then, I had an incurable disease. It was hereditary. My entire option was pain management. And I really believed that for 34 years, I guess. I mean, I really just believe
You're
this
hearing
is
that
something
from the experts, aren't you? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I will always remember, I'm a gastroenterologist, and I always remember a patient who I was asked to see because of a hemorrhaging ulcer. And it turned out the hemorrhaging ulcer was from her taking huge amounts of ibuprofen every day, which were for her headaches, which were connected to stress in her life. So there was this whole chain of dominoes that landed her in the hospital with the bleeding ulcer. Typically, it wouldn't be traced back to the source. A usual care for somebody like that would be to treat the ulcer and, not go too much beyond that. And it sounds like you were going through a very common experience of an acute pain caused by an injury evolving into a chronic pain because of a variety of underlying issues and pressures that we'll probably talk more about later. So did it just continue on for the next 34 years without much change then?
There were slight changes, which looking back, it did escalate over time, but it was more, I trace this back to, I got more management positions or more responsibility. I always had a lot of responsibility from a young age. And it was, I think, stress related and a lot of different components coming in with my personality. But there was a time when I was about, I guess it was mid-20s, late 20s, and I was going over to Europe for 3 months. And I had spoken to the doctor and I said, I'm going to go off of my medication because I can't get refills there and I'm going to just have to take my chances. And I had no pain. And looking back, of course, I was carefree. I had just this wonderful experience. I didn't even think about headaches or migraine, or this was just not even on the radar. And so I was fine, came back, got a job again, of course, and it was in a management position. It was sales and marketing. There was a lot of pressure to it. And then the migraine started again. And so it was
when you were in Europe for those 3 months, then you were between jobs.
I was.
So essentially on vacation, doing self-care,
exactly,
having a wonderful time.
Traveling, seeing new things, just feeling alive. Yeah.
Did that strike you at all at the time as information that could be useful about your migraines, or was it not recognized?
I think I recognized it as how odd, but I didn't go the step further of what would that mean? Why could that be? Because I really believed that this is incurable. It was just a blip in the radar that maybe I just was the different environment, or I don't know what I thought. But no, I didn't really dig too much deeper into that.
There is not the prevailing idea in our society that your brain is capable of causing severe pain or illness in the body. It's the usual assumption amongst the general public, as well as, unfortunately, most healthcare professionals, that if you've got a significant physical symptom, it's either from an organ disease or from an injury, and that there pretty much aren't any other alternatives to one or the other of those. But if we had the idea generally accepted that your brain was a third cause of significant pain or illness, then, an experience like that would almost certainly give you an aha moment that, you were over there in Europe having a good time, and it would immediately start somebody thinking, oh, well, I wonder if brain-generated symptoms are part of the condition here. It would be, let's say, much more likely for that idea to cross your mind than it was at the time, obviously. Okay, what happened after that?
Then it just continued to be a problem and came chronic at that point. It was just kind of episodic and then was chronic. I was off that medication, couldn't find, I tried to go back on the same medication. It didn't work somehow. It was just, and then I struggled with just trying to find symptom relief. And I think I was on triptans for just the episodic times that it was happening. And what I didn't realize at the time was this medication overuse. I was doing it again with, I had done it with the aspirin. I had done it again with the triptans. And by the time I got to Switzerland in my early 40s, I really was taking about a pack of at least 18 to 20 a month. And that is so problematic, obviously. I think it's 10 that is like when it starts going into the problem with. And again, I didn't know what this was. I think I had vaguely heard about it, but I was just busy. I was stressed. I was in the middle of, I was getting about 17 a month, and it was just day after day, just managing pain and trying to figure out how to avoid at the time I thought it was triggers, and I was obsessive about, figuring out the causes and what triggered this one and tracking them. And there was a lot of intensity around not only my life at the time, my work was extremely stressful. Coming to a new environment, so many new stressors and different things.
And were you able to keep working effectively? Did it affect your job performance at all?
It did. There was also it was a high profile position or a position where I was trying to actually hide it because I didn't want to be passed up for promotions. I didn't want people to not think that I was able to handle the stress. This is how I perceived it at the time. So I was working in big pharma at the time. And so I would try to take a break, take medicine, try to let it kick in. But then it was this spiraling effect of then I would at night have to work and make up for the work because that didn't go away. And I was having, hundreds of emails coming in. I mean, it was just constant. And so in 2019, the CGRPs had just come out in late, I think 2018. I was eligible in 2019. That gave me some relief. But what happened in Switzerland, you have to go off medication, or at the point when they were brand new, you had to go off medication, even if it was working, to see if you still needed it, essentially. So at that point, it caused pure panic. I had finally found it had dropped it to about 9 a month, which I was thrilled at. It was much better than the average of 17, which sounds crazy saying it out loud. I was forced on this pause, and I had made a mistake I thought I had one more month. And I went to the pharmacist and I was asking for the injection, and she said, no, sorry, you're now on this pause and I can't give you one. I was broken down in tears. I was just hysterical I have to have this drug. I mean, I was so classic of the dysregulated nervous system, the absolute panic sent to the brain of I can't manage without this. And that escalated, obviously. And I ended up, that was around 2020 now. I have COVID's happening. We've got the lockdowns. I'm far away from my parents. I've got this other stress of, and I ended up on sick leave. So it did escalate to me. Yeah, it was chronic, then chest pain, chronic heart pain, burnout, chronic fatigue. It was just like everything came crashing down at that point.
Your body was in full protesting mode.
Yeah.
Okay.
After a decade of, really very heavy stress, it just absolutely crashed.
And I'm curious about whether you were able to take vacation during that last decade and what happened to your migraines when you were on vacation.
I was able to, but it was never pure letting go and having a break. So it was always, doing a little bit of work on the side I do believe that, or I do recall that it was less when I was on holidays, and I always did find that interesting. And I knew, the doctor was telling me it's stress related. You need to let go of this job, which I was an expat in Switzerland. I didn't think I could function here without the salary of the pharma job. So that was always this stress that with the restructuring of the positions, and I couldn't lose the job. So yes, there was stress, but I just didn't know what to do about it, essentially. And yeah, so it did. I mean, people would say to me when I would come back from holiday that my face looks so much different. And I used to laugh about it. And I mean, it's sad now looking back, but they would say, you look so different. And so there must have been a let go and some relaxation. But I don't think I ever felt truly relaxed in that decade, basically.
Yeah. I mean, did they say your face looked better or just different?
Yes. That it was just so relaxed that I just looked, different.
Okay. All right. So let's move into happier times. You discovered some solutions.
When I was on sick leave, I asked to talk to a clinic because the Swiss are very holistic in nature anyway. And I really didn't want to be sitting on the couch and trying to figure this out on my own. So that was a very good decision on my part, because this is where I started learning about mind-body connection, about new things like I experimented with progressive muscle relaxation and meditation for the first time, just learning what the stress had done to my body and how this was affecting physical symptoms that were coming out. So this was the first that, and I had a really good doctor who I felt really seen and heard by. And the prescription when I first went on sick leave was, I want you on the couch, resting with no guilt. And he added that because he said, I know you over the last 10 years, no guilt to absolutely, go offline and an hour in nature every day. He said, I just want you walking.
That's wonderful to hear
nature. Yes. So this was my prescription, and it was essentially regulate your nervous system. Let's get you back to baseline. Let's get you, functioning again. And then we can look at what's going on. And then the clinic that I had consulted with, I mean, it was just really good. It was learning all these new tools and ways of looking at things and how my personality had contributed to things and victim mentality of the situation that I was in and all the contributing factors. There were so many. Really.
And what was most convincing to you to follow this? Because it's obviously radically different than what you'd been doing for decades. Was it more out of desperation because nothing else has worked? Or was it that somebody said resonated for you personally? Or both?
I think I was skeptical even when my symptoms started coming down for the first year and a half. And it was after the clinic and the consultancy about finding these concepts out, starting to work on them. And then I stumbled into Nicole Sachs and one of her podcast episodes that she was talking to somebody with migraine. And I just thought, is she talking about? This is so strange. And then I started digging into, then it was just all these, connections that I started following, all the rabbit holes down the internet, and the Curable app and Dr. John Sarno and then Dr. Howard Schubner and then you. And then, there was just so many different avenues and books. And I just really went all in at that point, totally believing it, probably not until a year and a half or 2 years in though. And but the symptoms were coming down. And the funny thing actually that I want to mention is that first year that I went on the pause of the medication, now I still had I had gone on a double dose of this CGRP then. So I had about 2 or 3 migraines at the time. So it was more about the burnout, the exhaustion. We were working on these type of things more than the migraine because the medication was sort of managing this at the time. But the second year I had gone to the neurologist and I said, I'm completely calm about this pause that I'm going on. I'm going to bet you that I'm not going back on this medication. I found the mind-body solution and I'm not going to need it. And what I didn't realize at the time was that, there's sometimes these 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and there was still a lot of intensity to how I was approaching just the cure, trying to find the last bit of information that would, correct everything. And so I still had the personality type was still there. So it didn't come. I had a long journey, I think, more so than, everybody's journey is different, but more so than I needed to because I didn't learn some of the key concepts at the beginning, I think that maybe I needed to look into first because my personality, even now that I decided not to go back to that job, my nervous system and my stress levels and my health was so much more important than the money of I just thought I would figure it out. I went back and got my coaching degree. I did do a rotation for a year in the department of the mindfulness and the stress management and all, which I loved, but they couldn't find a position for me. So I ended up leaving there. And then that was just, people would say, oh, well, you don't have stress anymore. Of course, your migraines are less. And I said, no, it has, my father had a sickness in the States. There's so many other stressors, it was just how I was managing things. And the symptoms really did start to come down. And I went off of, or I did go back on the second year after the pause. I went back on the medication, but I asked to go on 50%. So technically I would have gone back to the level that I would have 9 migraine, and I had maybe 1, but it was, on average, it was really none. And so I thought, yes, I'm still working on this, and this is great. This is working. And it did work. I really had no pain for probably 5 or 6 months. And then there's another little blip in the story of that I went to the US. My father had some health issues, and I was in the middle of, I had to decide whether I was going to move back there or what I was going to do with life, essentially. And so this kind of heaviness came back, and I decided, I think I panicked basically and went back on the medication because I was off for those 6 months. I had decided really that, I feel better. It's down. They're not coming.
All right, let me make sure I understand the timeline. You went on medical leave from your job when the physical symptoms became overwhelming. Did you ever go back to the job?
I went back to try to go back into the position. It was clear that I couldn't do that. So I did a job rotation for a year in the mindfulness and the employee health type of department. But it was clear that they couldn't hire me. And at the time, then in the timeline, I'm in the US at this decision point, and my father's sick, and I'm saying, okay, I can't come back anyway. Or they said, you've been in the US too long, you have to come back. And I couldn't because of the situation in the US. And so it was just a mutual parting at that point.
Okay, so you were actually employed by the mindfulness part of your company.
Yeah, for the last year.
And it sounds like that was a much lower stress environment, as you would hope for something with that name to it.
Yes.
Okay. But you're still having some symptoms today. Is that right?
So today, it's funny. Now I'm off all medication again, and I'm feeling well. It comes about now. I had a little bit of a back pain issue, and this was something that just came about right before a trip to the United States, right after COVID. And it was after this situation with my father's health, going back again then. I really didn't want to make the trip. There was other things that were sending messages to the brain every day. I don't want to do this. I really don't want to go. I don't want to go for that long. And just, a lot of things came with 10 days of back pain. The second trip that I made back to the US, I really was conscious of, hey, this is mind body as well. Let's soothe the brain. Everything's fine. It came with about 4 days of pain. And the third trip, no pain. Fourth trip, no pain, but I haven't had a problem with the back since. So that was, again, this other there's so much evidence that this is. And then it's just been little pain here and there, but I'm pretty clear on why it comes. I'm able to catch it and actually, I'll go for a walk, or I'll just really do some regulation, I guess you would say, and it doesn't escalate into a migraine. Or if it does, I'm pretty clear why or what the situation was. So now it's just very hit and miss when it comes.
You had said that it might have taken you a year and a half to fully absorb the mind-body ideas because you didn't grasp a couple of key ideas early on. Are you able to recall what those ideas might have been that you came upon perhaps later that were helpful? I
think one was that this fear-based thinking that is sending messages to the brain, that it wasn't just the thoughts that I was having. Also, it was so many other things that were causing the danger or the threat signals. So it was the personality. I wasn't really working on the personality all that much. I had greatly reduced the come out of this fight or flight nervous system state. I think it was just sort of I was very kind of zen, and nothing was going to infiltrate this bubble that I had put myself in. And I just was really cautious about stress and who I was around and the feelings that I were getting. So I was good in that way. But there were so many other pieces of that I didn't quite understand how much that was affecting me. And I don't think I probably got to that point until I started my business and started the coaching career and this kind of thing. And I had more stress. And then the perfectionism came back in and I realized, okay, these things haven't been tested too much. And now I'm realizing, yeah, there's other things to work on, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's at least in my practice, such an important part of successful treatment for somebody is to identify the personality habits, tendencies, traits, call them what you want, that are still capable of causing high levels of stress for people. There are also sometimes emotions going on below the surface that can create problems. And there are also sometimes triggers in a person's present day life that are particularly stressful because they are linked in some way to the past or to past traumas. But why don't we talk for a moment about the personality traits my colleague Dr. Schechter calls type T personality. If you can share a little bit about which of those might have been prominent for you.
I think with work, it was this perfectionism, or that if my name was attached to it, it had to be right, in quotes for sure. And it was not wanting to let people down. And on the friend group, I had a lot of times that I was canceling plans. So I wasn't reliable, and I felt, this was one of my big values. I wanted to be trusted and reliable. And this was just really going against this inner grain, I guess you would say, and causing a lot of tension. Self-compassion, absolutely none, zero. Tough inner critic. I mean, I was pretty classic with all the ones that put a lot of pressure and tension on myself.
Yeah, and as long as those are there, they will always be a source of pressure and can ultimately reach a level of pressure that produces physical symptoms. It has helped a lot of my patients to make changes in those, and there are certainly many mental health professionals that take those personality traits as a given, as something that you're going to have for the rest of your life. I haven't found that to be the case, and my patients who've been able to make changes have found that their stress level comes way down, and that has a major impact on their health. But it does help, at least in my practice, a lot if we can trace the roots of those personality traits back to experiences that a person had as a kid, because they tend to be learned. People don't become perfectionist, at least in my experience, as a result of genetics, or, they're not just randomly born that way. Perfectionism, self-criticism, focus on the needs of others, a lack of self-compassion, a lack of self-care, those are learned behaviors, and they can be unlearned. Can you think of anything when you were growing up that might have pushed you in those directions?
Yeah, I definitely attribute that back to my childhood. And I had one parent that was very much, I did everything right. I couldn't, anything I did was the best, and just really positive reinforcement. And from the other parent, just very, very hard on me, and I couldn't do anything right. So I was in this, it really confused the self, the concept of myself. Am I good? Am I bad? Am I horrible? Am I stupid? Am I brilliant? Like, it just was very confusing. And so I think in hindsight now, as an adult, it was always trying to prove this worth that, yes, I did get that right. I did make the right decision. No, I didn't make the mistake, or, so I think a lot of my just trying to be seen, trying to be heard. Yeah, it definitely stems back to the childhood. That's
yeah.
good.
And it's when it's learned at such a young age from people that are so powerful in your life, it tends to become a basic assumption that you have to do things perfectly. You have to focus on the details. You have to be constantly trying to do things better. And whenever you do make a mistake, you're going to be harder on yourself than you ever would be on somebody else that made exactly the same mistake. Another characteristic that's not as often investigated as it should be, in my opinion, is how much time people take for their own enjoyment, relaxation, self-care, lots of different ways to characterize it. But basically, focusing on taking time that has no purpose but your own joy, putting yourself on the list of people you take care of. Many of my patients, they just don't do that because they're so busy with everything else. Would that be a fair way to characterize the way you were living?
Absolutely. Yeah. I really had a story in my mind. I had a story in my mind that I just didn't have time for that, which, now I say to others, you don't have time to not have time. This is such a critical piece to it, to have this joy or to have enjoyment and to lighten up. And yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you would never tell an employee that they don't have time for their own joy. You wouldn't call them into your office and say, I'm sorry, you can't take vacation, you can't take a break, you can't go off and do something fun on the weekends. I mean, we need you to focus. I mean, that just wouldn't be something you would do for somebody else.
Right. Right.
So in terms of these characteristics today, have they shifted or are they the same?
No, absolutely shifted. It's funny because when I was healed and when my niece was coming over to see me every summer, and I guess 2 years after I was off on sick leave and I was, feeling better with the migraine and I just had done a lot of work on myself. And she said, I can't believe you are a completely different person. And I didn't think that, how is that possible? And I said, I feel like I am, but what do you mean? How was I before? And I'll never forget this because she said, you were really wound tight. And that just sums it all up. It really sums me for a very long time. And it just kind of melted. And I realized there is no such thing as perfection. I was easier on myself. I mean, it's still a journey, the self-compassion and all these different things. I'm much more compassionate with myself. I'm much more easygoing. Now that I've started the business, I see little things creeping back up and I try, but I'm conscious of it at least. And I'm realizing, okay, that's you trying to have everything right before it goes out. And no, don't do that again. So
something that has helped, this may not be something that you would need at all, but many of my patients have benefited from looking back at the experience that they had as kids and imagining a child of their own going through the same thing. And that gives them a more accurate sense of the burden that they had to endure at that time. And it can help them with their compassion for themselves to recognize that a kid who was going through that has really come through a lot, and that now that they're an adult, taking time for yourself, being compassionate toward yourself is something that you've more than earned after having come through something like that. And to give yourself some credit that you were put in that environment of completely opposite treatment by the parents through no fault of your own, but you had to cope with it somehow. And you did, and you deserve a tremendous amount of credit for having come through that. I'm just curious, since you had a flare-up of symptoms when you had to go back and see your dad, was it your dad who was the one that was insisting on your being perfect, or was it Mom?
No, Mom. Dad was the big fan. So I think it was a very scary time because it was heart issues and it wasn't sure what was happening there or if he was going to make it. And I think that was a huge trigger of, that's my biggest fan. This is my biggest support in life. And so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's very understandable. I'm also going back to that first doctor who told you were going to lie on the sofa with no guilt. He sounds like very much a kindred spirit to myself, because I tell my patients things like that all the time. How have you been able to do with the guilt? Because so many of my patients, when I ask them to learn self-care skills, to learn how to take time for their own joy, one of the biggest barriers is, all of a sudden they're putting themselves on the list of people they take care of. And it's a completely new idea, a completely foreign concept. They've never done it before. And there's always that idea in their head that I could be doing this or that or all these other productive, useful things with my time. And here I am self-indulging and the guilt comes bubbling up. How have you been able to deal with that?
I think I look at it now radically different, that my health depends on it and it's a non-negotiable. So it's really, I don't have the guilt with that now. I think I did when I was so busy in work. I just felt like it was laziness and I couldn't understand why I was so low energy and I couldn't motivate myself to do things. So it was more of this, guilt and laziness feeling. Now it's just, this is what I need to replenish. This is what I enjoy or whatever the case may be. But now I look at it as a critical part of self-care to stay symptom-free.
And have you added activities to your life that are for fun that you had never done before? Or have you simply done some of the things that were fun for you in the past, but done more of them?
I think it's things from the past. I was really into artwork in high school, and this is what that area of high school and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life was. I like art, but how do you make a living off of it? So I went in a different direction, which kind of took me off of, I kind of feel like, this soul path or this, purpose path, I guess you could say. Now I've come back and I kind of gave art up. It was like, okay, well, you need to get serious now and you need to figure out how you're going to make a living and pay the rent. And life just got very serious. And so now I've just brought this back in. When I went on sick leave, part of the clinic thing was art therapy. And I started around paints again and color. And I just was really like, oh, maybe this is what I need to go back to, and decided that that was more of a creative outlet that I loved. I didn't want to do that as a career necessarily, but that this was, so now I do, watercolor or photography again, and just
for
the enjoyment
definitely things that you did not do when you were working in the corporate world.
No, not at all.
Yeah, a story that I love to share is about a patient of mine who found piano lessons to be incredibly fulfilling, and she'd never done anything musical before. But once she latched onto that and found it a source of pure joy for her, the pains that she was having went away. Just a remarkable transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my patients, and this is probably not the case for you, but some of my patients have still a tremendous amount of emotion that they are not consciously aware of, usually, not surprisingly, a negative emotion, anger, fear, shame, grief, guilt that's still ongoing, that can be triggered by interacting with people from the past. And they're not consciously aware of it. They can get triggered by people who mistreated them in the past, for example, and maybe not make the connection. So I'll just throw that out there to see if you have any experiences that might be connected to that.
Yeah, I think the emotional piece has been the biggest challenge for me in this healing journey, because I don't have many memories from my childhood, and I really struggled to get frustrated or upset or to feel the feelings of mistreatment. Or there were many, many traumas in my childhood and early adult life that I never told my parents about. I never told anybody about. And so it was this deep secrets and shame and, all this stuff inside. And when I would try to write about it in journaling, or I would try to get that emotion, I knew how important this was to get this up and out of me, but it was just not, it was words on paper, basically, not coming to the surface of the actual emotion. So this I still struggle with, and wonder how that plays out as far as if, some of the symptoms that still come up. Or in recent months, I just started dating someone, and I do feel like this triggered a lot of different things of the worthiness or the, stuff from childhood or the independence. Do I want to, the overthinking, all these different things came up again, and it was triggering some symptoms again. Dull headaches, thankfully, and maybe just a few migraine. But so I know there's some things underneath the surface that still need work, I would say. And this maybe then stops any of the flare-ups that come up in the future.
People, as children who are being told that they're not good enough, they obviously react emotionally to that. But because the expression of the emotions doesn't do any good, they get very good at repressing them. And it can be very hard to connect with them. Something that has helped at least some of my patients is, again, the exercise of imagining a kid of your own or another child that you care about going through the same experience, being told that they're not good enough. I don't know if you have any nieces or nephews or children of your own, but imagine treating them the same way and what it would be like to watch that happening. And that can sometimes connect with the emotions around that. Emotions that you can't feel yourself when you look back at your own childhood, oftentimes you can feel them when it involves an innocent child.
Mm-hmm.
Another area I can at least mention, and again, it may not apply to you specifically, but many of my patients, when they grow up in an environment where they have to focus intensely on other people in their environment, in your case, being emotionally and verbally mistreated by an adult, you would be probably very focused on doing whatever you could to minimize that mistreatment. And when your attention is drawn to the needs of somebody else, it can play out in the choices of your close personal relationships as an adult, choosing to be with people that have certain emotional needs that you end up focusing on in much the same way that you focused on mom growing up. And it can end up in unbalanced relationships, let's put it that way, where the amount of focus and energy that you're giving to the person you're in a relationship with ends up not being returned. The relationship ends up being unbalanced. Mm-hmm. But when a person has made progress in moving away from that, then, that's a good thing. And entirely different sorts of people start to show up in your close personal relationships. And that's obviously a good thing. But in the short run, it can be stressful, and can be stressful for two reasons. One is questions about whether you are, if you are with somebody who's in a balanced, mutually supportive relationship, that's obviously a good thing. But if you haven't sufficiently been in one of those before, you can start to wonder if you are worthy of it, deserving of it, if you're in a certain level of imposter syndrome going on, at least early in the relationship. And the second thing that can be stressful about it is that the more you decide that this person that you're with who is treating you well for a good reason, then the good reason being that you are a worthy person, then it means that you were probably a worthy little girl too. And it's difficult to escape the idea that you probably deserve to be treated just as well as a child as you are being treated now by this good person in your life. And that can stir up those emotions that we were just talking about, that they start to kind of come knocking on the door again, that you start to feel like, if I'm really worthy of being treated well today, for sure I was worthy of being treated better as a kid. So again, this may not necessarily apply in your situation.
100% talking exactly to me.
Okay.
Exactly. The thoughts that are coming up, the feelings, the worthiness. Yes, this is very accurate.
Okay. Well, it's actually a good thing, because these mutually beneficial and supportive relationships do not happen until a person has achieved a very significant level of personal healing.
Yeah.
Because you have to believe that you are a worthy human being before you can accept somebody in your life who shares that view.
Yeah, this is the realization that I've come to recently. And as soon as I said that I was having some flare-ups of symptom as this was starting, and as soon as I came to this realization that I basically exactly what you just said, and I said, take the foot off the brake. This is good. I deserve it. Everything, all symptoms have been gone. So
Great.
it's just
Yeah.
more evidence, but yeah.
No, that's very good to hear. Yeah, it's what I call the good partner, bad illness syndrome, that ironically somebody who is finally for the first time sometimes in a really good, close personal relationship can get temporarily worse. Mm. Very ironic, but I have seen it countless times in my practice. But it's only temporary, as you've already found.
Thankfully, yes.
That's a really good thing.
It's fascinating, all of this, really.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, I had no idea that the brain could do this kind of thing to the body. The level of severity that can be achieved. I mean, 30 plus years of migraines. One of our nonprofit board members was incapacitated by migraines for 6 or 7 years. My very first patient with this condition was averaging 1 bowel movement per month. Another patient of mine had a completely paralyzed stomach. I mean, it was just absolutely, the stomach muscles were not contracting at all. Just hard to believe that the brain can actually do this until I had seen it with my own eyes and my own medical diagnostic tests. I should also add that, in addition to the good partner, bad illness syndrome, sometimes it's not necessarily a good partner. It's some other life-affirming event can do the same thing. Make people recognize the magnitude of their mistreatment that they endured when they were kids, because something really positive and good has happened to them. One of my patients became ill after he had received the Employee of the Year award. And he worked for a 400-person company, so it was quite a prestigious award for him. And it conflicted with what he had been told about himself, all of his early years, and created a lot of temporary conflict for him that resulted in illness. So it's another way that, even at the more advanced stages of the healing process, that there can be temporary setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
But, when you come through the setback and get to the other side of it, as you clearly have done, there's no going back. I mean, it's a big step forward that, in this case, is not going to be accompanied by a future step backward.
Right. That's how I feel. I mean, all the different things that have happened now, it's a blip. It's the body trying to communicate something else to me. And I really see it as a protection and a messenger, and that it's, I wouldn't say pain is good, but it's a good message and what comes out of it. Because my life is 1,000 times better than it's ever been. So all this was for, not for nothing. For sure.
How is the coaching work going?
Good. Yeah, I really enjoy it. I mean, I definitely have found my passion. I could talk about this topic all day, all night. I will be one of the ones helping spread this message because I always say it's not just life changing, it's life giving. I literally got my life back. I mean, I was in bed every other day at the height of this. It was horrible. I couldn't see a future. And so now it's just everything is bright and I just see the possibilities, and I want to spread the message and help other people now.
Yeah, it's one of the most remarkable aspects of this work is you're not only alleviating pain or illness, but you are transforming the way people live their lives as a direct correlation with the work to alleviate the symptoms. That's what, kept me going in my early years, is that aspect of it, that I was not only doing my doctor work of alleviating symptoms, but I also saw people's lives were changed by this. And I wasn't supposed to do this kind of work. I was supposed to be a gastroenterologist and put endoscopes inside of people and poke around. But this became 35% of my patients for decades, and I kept on with it, even though I was a bumbling beginner for a long time, because of the not only physical transformation, but mental and emotional transformation that I was seeing too.
Yeah, I mean, it changes everything. Once you start feeling well, it changes the relationships, the work you can do, the socialization, all these different things. Yeah, it's really life-giving.
Okay, well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this information. I think our viewers who see this are going to be inspired by your journey and the fact that you reached the other side of it, even after so many decades of suffering. And I absolutely hope that more healthcare professionals see this, because it would just open up a door to a new form of practice for them. A family doctor who learned these concepts from some of our online courses at symptomatic.me, she took me aside at a conference and said these ideas had put the joy back into her work. And it did that for me too. I mean, I had joy in my work even before I started doing this, but it just elevated it to see these outcomes. Really would love for my medical colleagues in particular to experience that.
Yes, definitely.
Any last questions or comments that you have before we close?
No, I just thank you for all the work you're doing. And I hope this helps somebody to realize it's not a life sentence, that there is hope out there and ways to come out of this pain. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. Been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. You too. All right.